Hello, I am your host, Karen Doyle, and welcome to the Genius Podcast. The Genius Podcast is part of a much bigger initiative for Catholic women called the Genius Project. The heart of the Genius Project is dedicated to equipping and supporting women of all ages and stages of life to discover what it is that God has placed within their hearts to do, giving them the permission to follow that God whisper and dream, and then equipping them with the knowledge and practical skills to make it happen. Over the years, I've often been approached by women seeking advice and mentoring. They want to know how I did what I did and how they could discover what their gifts were, and once they discovered them, how they could use them in a way that brought life and was abundant. They wanted to know how to live their calling. If you are looking to discover what it is that you are called to do with your life, if you have a dream or a passion, but you lack the skills and confidence to take that next step, or you just need some great advice on living your vocation as a Catholic woman, then this podcast is for you. Today's Genius guest is Francesca Cicwetti, or Frankie as she's known to those who know her. Frankie and her mother Rena form a powerful mother-daughter team and founded Storia Studios, a branding, photography and filmmaking business which also offers social media coaching. Together they share a passion for storytelling. With a background in film photography and studio portraiture, they love to combine their skills to create compelling images which tell a story. In today's episode, Frankie and I will be taking a look at the power of story. We wander around a few topics, from the power of our own story to how we tell a story through creating a brand or in ministry, or even how you can tell a story which frames the culture of your family. We look at how we can bring a Catholic mindset to business and why this matters. And we wrap up by me shooting Frankie 4 different scenarios of everyday Catholic women seeking to make a difference for her advice, input and wisdom. This conversation with Frankie wanders around a number of topics which we will be deep diving into through the Genius Project in coming months. Topics such as how you can start your own business, how do you take a passion project and turn it into something more, how do you find your unique call and use your gifts, and much more. Since the Genius Project launched, I have had countless messages from women asking for advice on these things. So if that's you, stay tuned, because in the coming weeks we will unveil our suite of online courses and membership site just for you. But until then, sit back, relax and enjoy this conversation with Frankie. I came across your Instagram feed and it's called Storia. That's your brand and your business. And I just connected with it instantly. I think on many levels, my genius zone and my gifts are in the area of creativity and media and graphic design and business and branding. And so when I saw it, I was like, oh, this is a woman I would love to have a conversation with.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for having me, Karen. I am just so honored to be here. I started following you after I saw Rachel Ullman posted about the interview and her podcast. And I was just really drawn to the mission and how you want to serve Catholic women and speak to people in a variety of life stages. So yeah, I'm excited.
Man, fantastic. And so one of the things, like, I love your brand is Storia. And that's Italian for story. And so today in our conversation, we're going to unpack this idea of the power of story, like our personal stories, but then also in business. And when we tell a story through our brand in business or ministry or whatever it is. But before we jump into it, I'd love you to share a little bit about your journey, because it's really, really exciting.
I think that for those that don't know, my mother, Rena, is also my business partner. And we started our business back in 2018. We're based in Baltimore, Maryland. I guess that's not really the beginning of the story because that feels very recent. So I actually, kind of my journey personally, because of my mom, my mom is actually, I grew up watching her as an artist. She was a photographer for mostly family and friends. But as a teenager into even being a college student, I would help her with a lot of her projects and vice versa. I studied art in college as well. So she was helping me with my projects. I was helping her with hers. And it just was this natural progression. Like, we've actually always kind of worked together unofficially. And so after I graduated college, I was really involved in a campus ministry group. And I actually was a campus minister for 4 years before being a full-time artist. And I worked at an all visual arts college in Baltimore called Maryland Institute College of Arts through an organization called InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. And I loved InterVarsity and I loved being on staff, and I thought it was perfect, right? Like, oh, I'm going to work with artists and I'm going to teach them how to share the gospel. And that's what we do. And I do think that God called me to that position for a season, but I also realized that slowly I started to get my own clients and I was part-time as a filmmaker. And then slowly, Brene, my mom, and I decided to, when I was at a kind of a crossroads, to start this business together, because we realistically also looked at, our networks and we're like, we think it's time, and I think we can actually do this. Yeah, that's kind of a little glimpse into our story, and she has a whole story too. But I also think being like from different generations, multi-generational, we bring a unique perspective. So like, where I may be insecure in something, she is very secure in, and where, maybe she's weak in, I'm strong in. So we like complement each other in that way, in our experiences in business and how we connect to our clients and the service we offer.
Fantastic. It's great. Did you always have an interest in business? Like, were you drawn to that? Or is it just something that unfolded gradually?
It was more of an unfolding gradually for me, because I remember thinking about starting a business a long time ago and being like, I can't do that. It's too hard. It's too scary, and I had a lot of excuses because of my own insecurities. And then when I started doing part-time film and photography, someone would be like, do you have a business card? And I was like, oh, I should like get one of those. And they're like, do you have a website? Yeah. And like, do you have a website? And like, I mean, I could make one. And then like, how much do you charge for this? And I'm like, I guess I could make a price guide. So it was pretty reactive. But as I look back, I think God was like lining certain things up for me. And so that's not to say that somebody, if you're determined to like start a business and that's your goal, you can totally achieve it. But I was very surprised that is like the path that God had for us, was actually starting a business. And when you take it a step at a time, and break it down into tangible goals, it's actually like really possible,
Yes, it is. Yeah, I remember the moment where I was really attracted to business, and we were living shortly after we got married in far north Queensland, up in Cairns. And my husband had a motorbike. It was like a Harley copy cruiser. And every Saturday morning we'd jump on that and head up this beautiful stretch of coast towards a town called Port Douglas. And there were many little beaches, and we'd stop off there and have breakfast together. And I remember this warm Saturday morning, the sun was shining across the ocean, blue sky, and we stopped at this cafe at a place called Palm Beach. And Jonathan bought a couple of magazines this day instead of the newspaper. And they were business magazines, and we started flipping through them. And I remember something just captivated me, just about the business of business. I was really intrigued by it. And it's funny, like you say, it doesn't happen in an instant, but it's a gradual progression. So where God reveals, I guess, the next stage. So I remember reading this stuff on business and being really interested in it. And then as we worked together, and it unfolded, we decided to set up our own business. And now we set up a number of online businesses and a couple of other ones from the ground up. One of them we've sold. And so I'm really excited about this concept of business, and especially how we bring our Catholic faith and into that business world, because they're not two separate realities.
Right. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so I think... we need Catholic businessmen, we need Catholic businesswomen doing amazing things in that arena and bringing Christ to life and shining his light in particular areas.
Yes. Oh my gosh. So true. So true. Because I think also, depending on the industry you're in, God has placed you there, and how will he use you in that field? Like, I'm in the arts and, the visual arts, and while, of course, there are so many, Christian artists, oftentimes, there in my circles, there hasn't been that like representation. And so there's opportunities for like evangelism, there's opportunities for spiritual conversations. It's really easy to be like, oh, like I'm a Catholic artist when I'm making like Catholic art, right?
Yes.
Because like some of our clients are Catholic organizations, but it's like harder to remember that I'm like a Catholic artist on like the tough days when I really need to like lean on God and like not give in to comparison in the business world, or give in to gossip, or just a tough day mentally maybe. And so like, that's also like where we have to like lean on God in business too, and model that for others.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we were just chatting around this before the podcast started about the attitude that you bring to it. And I think it's primarily an attitude of service. And you touched on this, that it's not about building an empire or self-advancement. When we bring a Catholic lens to business or to ministry, whatever it is that we're doing, that lens is through the lens of service. Like, how can I bless? How can I serve these people? As you said, how can I serve this audience with my gifts and my skills? I think that's a really important distinction to make when we're talking about bringing our Catholic faith into this arena.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think, and we were sharing about this earlier, I think that when you have the attitude of like, I have a gift to give, and if I don't share this gift, like I'm robbing someone of what I can offer. And so you're like putting the audience or putting whoever you're serving with first. You're not making it about you, but in the world of social media and things like that, like maybe perhaps, for those listening, like you might be the face of your brand. And so it's a balance, right? Because I mean, there have been times when I've made business about me selfishly, but you have to, what's going to anchor you back in those moments to be like, oh, what's it all for? And who is it all for? And what's my identity? And as a child of God,
Absolutely. Yeah. I posted this Instagram post a while back, and it talked about, it was a worship singer, and she was talking about who you're doing it for, exactly as you said. And she said, if you're getting into that numbers game of comparing and counting how many followers and all of that, she made the point, whose kingdom are you building, yours or God's? Because the chances are, if you've fallen into that trap of the numbers game, you're not building God's kingdom anymore. You've started focusing on yourself. And I think I watched that and I thought, wow, that's powerful. And it's really helped me with, I guess, my social media, that every time I go onto the social media or post something, I'm like, okay, Lord, just praying about serving the women in that community rather than trying to get likes or trying to grow the numbers. It's really about a service of those women. And I think that's a really important mindset, that for anyone who's starting out in ministry or business, or I mean, anywhere in life, right? Whether it's marriage, parenting, religious life, this is our heart, that we're here to make a gift of ourselves to people in love, as John Paul II said.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I totally agree. I think we can get really caught up in like the metrics of it all, and specifically with social media. It's just important to remember as you build your business, like you were saying, like you have like a target audience, like who is it for? And like get really specific. And so like don't measure your success by like, you might get 100 likes on a post, but like, is that for like your dream customer? Is that for your dream like podcast viewer or whoever? Like, who are you reaching? And so you might find that the more you like narrow down your focus, you actually might get better engagement on like the social media and algorithm level, but also in like real life too, you are putting out what you want to attract. And then, even when we first started Storia 2 years ago, our Instagram posts were getting like maybe 1 or 2 likes. And you know what? That's okay. And
we got to start somewhere.
You got to start somewhere. And it's like, oh my gosh, instead of being like only 2 people liked my post, I'm like, oh my gosh, 2 people liked my post, And so just remembering the power of like 1, and you're just need to reach like 1 person at a time. And even if, I don't know, I was just saying this the other day, like 10 people like your post and you're like, oh, that's not a lot. But I think it's a lot, because if you put 10 people in a room, that's a lot of people, you know what I mean? Like around a table, like that's actually a lot of people. And like, remember there's like people behind these screens. And the more that you can, every time you post or every time you do something for your business, like you said, remembering like, who is it that you are trying to serve,
That's right. Yeah. Also asking, how is God asking me to tell my story? to whoever it is. It might be over the garden fence to the neighbor, but this idea of story, and this is what I'd love to move into a little bit more, is just this personal story. And it's incredibly powerful. And I think that in our culture today, we've really lost the art of storytelling. So I remember growing up, I had all these great aunts. So my nana, my dad's mum, had about 6 sisters, and they were our great aunts. And we would go, to the country to visit them 4 hours away from where we lived, and we might go for a weekend, and they'd all sit around and they would just tell stories. And so I grew up knowing, I guess, having a sense of identity within this bigger picture of story. Like, where am I from? What am I attached to? What's the history here of the legacy of family? And it's very powerful, but I find that we don't do that so much anymore. And I'm very conscious of it with my own children, of just telling stories about our childhood. During COVID and coming out of COVID, we've had Jonathan, my husband's mum, over for dinner every Thursday night. And it's been really lovely. And he actually started by drawing things out of her. Like, what was your favourite memory growing up? What was the naughtiest thing you did? And the kids were captivated. They were hanging on every word. And I thought, gosh, how interesting, because we would never think to ask those questions normally. But creating a context where people can tell their story is really fantastic. I think everything's too quick, too fast in our culture. Wouldn't you agree? And we
my gosh, yes.
don't get a sense of people's story. And then I also think we don't realize that we have a story to tell.
Yes, definitely. I mean, I think that I love what you were saying about we've lost the art of storytelling. I love the idea of, like, you're just sitting around the kitchen table and you're sharing a story about your family's legacy and asking questions. And honestly, like, that's really relatable to me. Storia is Italian for story. And we did that because, my mom and I are Italian American, and we just like to reflect on our heritage. And my mom's kind of become like the ancestry person of our family. And so I would just, look at family albums growing up. We would share stories on the kitchen table. Even to this day, like, my grandma talks about, what it was like moving over here from, around the World War II time to the States. And so, if it wasn't for that, like, I think that is what completely has shaped, like, our business. And we try to do that for others,
Everybody has a story to tell. I remember walking with a girl once, and because I do a fair bit of speaking, she was saying she wanted to speak and speak to young people about their value, but she just didn't feel that she had a story to tell. And I often hear that from people where they say, I don't think I have anything to say. But everybody has a story. So what would be your, I guess, advice in terms of people tapping into their story? Like, where would people start? Because I think whether or not you're on a stage, whether it's over the back fence, whether or not it's creating film, we all have a story to tell of how Christ has impacted us. And it's a very Catholic idea that we own our story and know what our story is, so that we are ready when there's an opportunity to give witness to Christ and to what he's done in our life. So I'm interested in, I guess, your thoughts on how do people tap into their own story? Where would they start to kind of think about their story?
Yeah. I mean, that's such a great question. I feel like when I hear you say that, I think of Moses, when he says to God, like, why me? Or send somebody else, like, you got the wrong guy. I'm paraphrasing, of course.
Yes.
And so I think that I love that passage and just relating to that, because I do think, that's, like you said, like, that is the story of our faith, is like God using ordinary people. So I think sometimes there are people out there that have extraordinary stories, that have these insane stories that are like, oh my gosh, like, I can't believe that happened. And those are valid. And then you have the ones that are ordinary, and maybe it's not super dramatic, but like, that is just as worthy. And so you don't have to be ashamed of that and compare yourself to other people. You just start with where you are, especially if you're giving a talk, or if you're starting a podcast or a business or any of those things. You have to pretend to be anything but yourself.
So I think, like, we're talking about this idea of story and telling our story, but I think like you talked about ordinary stories, but I'm thinking about also ordinary moments, like over the back fence, I keep saying, like an ordinary moment where there's an invitation to engage with another person or an invitation to share and speak into their life. I also think for mums, like with young kids at home, often I talk to a lot of mums and they don't feel that they're using their gifts, or they like, I don't have an opportunity to share my story. But what I like to say to them is, like, you have this little audience before you in your children. And even there, that storytelling, giving them a vision to buy into about life and faith and values and integrity. Like, there's the art of storytelling to your family, to your kids, giving them a vision to reach for in life. And then there's the evangelization and speaking on a stage or wherever else it takes you. But I think we've always got to remember, like Mother Teresa said, those simple moments are so powerful, and God can do so much in those simple moments with a simple story.
Oh my gosh. Yes. I mean, I'm not a parent, but I, as a daughter, with my mom, just like modeling her life, in front of me, I completely agree. Like, she shows me who Christ is every day.
I think there's seasons for everything, isn't there? And I think that season particularly when I speak to those mums who are at home raising kids in the trenches, because I think there's such a focus in our world on productivity and use your gifts and do this amazing thing. But the gifts that women have when they're raising their children are not wasted. Like the gift of homemaking and storytelling in the home, and the sacrifices that mothers make for their children can never be undervalued, I think. And I think in this world it actually is more and more. And I think that's a real tragedy when you have young mums who feel like they're not using their gift, or that their time is being wasted raising their family. I just really love speaking into the hearts of those women and just saying, if God's placed a dream in your heart, for whether it's a creative dream or to start a business or to do anything really, to learn the piano, like there's seasons, and I think God places those desires there for a reason. And like your mum, he will bring that to fruition at the right time. I really,
oh my gosh,
yeah, I really believe that. I remember that season of being stuck with 3 kids, like stuck, I say, because it was totally sleep deprived, 3 babies in nappies, and it was a long season and a tough season. But I do remember all of those things that were in my heart just were still there, and they simmered away, and I used that time to, I guess, read and upskill in the spaces that I had to do that, so that when the season came for me to step out and to be more active, I was able to do that. So I think, God uses every season, and
Yes. Well, and I think, it reminds me of the passage, like, delight yourself in the Lord and he will give you the desires of your heart. It's not your desires and then God. It's like, align yourself in prayer with God. And, he has placed these talents and these desires in you, and trusting that, like you said, he'll bring that to fruition.
Yeah. Absolutely. So look, we've talked about personal stories and all of that, but what I'm really interested in teasing out with you this morning is this idea of, I guess, telling a story through business and through branding, and I guess bringing a Catholic lens to how we do that. So whether it's like a passion project or someone starting to explore their creativity, I'm really interested in your ideas and your insights into people who are in that phase of a startup, in whatever phase that is, what they need to do to sort of tell a story and to start to brand, because it's very important to get that message right from the beginning, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I mean, there's so many aspects to building a brand, but I'd say that, like, to distill it down a bit, I heard someone say once that building a brand is what people say, like, when you're not in the room. And I don't mean that in like a shady way, no. But in a way of like, what is like the experience, like working with you. Part of it is, and I can get more granular, but it's showing up and doing the work and putting yourself out there, or whatever that looks like for your business. And ultimately, like we were talking before, like, it's building trust with your audience, offering them a service, and the more that like I said before, the more that we can really figure out who it is that you're trying to serve, it's going to be easier. Like if you're ever on somebody's like Instagram grid and you're scrolling and you see a quote and you're like, oh my gosh, I needed to hear that today. To me, the chances are, and I don't mean this in a manipulative way, but the person on the other side has probably like thought about the person that they're trying to reach. So it resonates with you because it feels tailor-made to you. And so when you try to stop being all things to all people, you know, it frees you up to really figure out like, where's my place in whatever market I'm in? You know what I mean? So I think another aspect to building a brand, Gary Vaynerchuk is an entrepreneur, and he talks about this idea of documenting over create. And what he means by that is sometimes we get very caught up in the perfection of being this perfect brand, an online presence. And like, I really care about aesthetic and I care about like, you know, really good copy. But at the end of the day, sometimes you just have to hit publish. You just have to hit post, right? Like, are you holding yourself back? And so don't be afraid to document the process. And so, because in a couple years, going back to storytelling, you can look back and see how far you've come. You know, don't be ashamed that like for me, like I have an at-home office right now. It's not the biggest, but it's like, I love my little office. And I'm not ashamed of it because maybe one day Rena and I will have a space, but maybe not. And so I'm documenting the process, like one for just myself, because I'm obsessed with taking pictures of everything and all that. But two, to inspire hopefully my audience that like you can start where you are. Like you don't have to be like super, super fancy and have it all together to start. You have to have certain structures in place, but don't let that hold you back. For a while, like it was really bizarre to me that before we officially like became an LLC as Storia, Rena and I were getting inquiries and we didn't even have a website yet.
That's amazing.
And it was so crazy. And like, you know, I don't say that to gloat. I'm just saying like, you know, like we were in the process of creating it and buying the domain name. And like, people are like, well, I'm ready to hire you right now. And I'm like, what? I was so surprised because I value, as a visual artist, like I value like those structures like so much. And I do think, of course, a website's important, but you'd be surprised like what can happen even through direct messaging and building your business that way, you know?
And I think that's a trap that a lot of women do fall into. It's this perfectionism that we think we have to, whether it's like in setting up a business or whatever sphere it is, but we often get so tied up in knots trying to get all the ducks in a row before we take the step, before we act on something. And what you're saying, and I think this is really important, is just to step out and act, take imperfect action. Might not work, might not end up being the right path, or might not be perfect, but that imperfect action is really important, I think, when it comes to starting something and to then maintaining a business as well.
Oh my gosh, I love that. I just wrote that down. Take imperfect action. I love that because
it's good.
That's it. And if you know yourself, like for me, I'm a big picture person, but if I like that's where my mom like comes in, where she's like really good at the nitty gritty stuff. So she's like, great, like you had an idea that you wanted to create this like new demo reel, Frankie, but like her and our producer, like they helped me be like, okay, like, so when are you editing that? And like, let's put it on the calendar.
What other steps?
Like, whoa. Yeah. If you know yourself, like maybe you don't need that structure, but like self-awareness is really important too. Like know yourself and know what you're really good at and know what you're really bad at, you know, and delegate.
Absolutely. Outsource. I love that. and you can't do it all. Like you can't do it all and not expected to do it all. So I think it's about, like you said, identifying your core skills and your core gifts and then outsourcing and delegating to people. I know when we started business, I had the business mentor and they said you need to spend time working on the business, not in the business. Like if you're an entrepreneur, like you need to, as quickly as possible, delegate the tasks that you can to other people so that you can work on the area that is your genius zone, is your strength.
Yes. Oh my gosh. It's important to, and to me, like building a brand as well as like, you know, that's what people say when you're not in the room, but also like the ins and outs of the business, the daily life. Like it's more like, there's a lot of behind the scenes that people don't see. I think I've learned over time to not put my worth, not just it's easy to say, don't put your worth in if you have like a failure, right? Like that's easy to know because it's like, okay, my worth is not in when I fail or a mistake I made, but also you need to be mindful that your worth also isn't in your successes fully, right?
Absolutely.
Like it's like, so then, your ego is kind of in check because if I get like a dream client, like inquiry, I really try to check myself. I'm not like over the moon and like elated because the next day when like something happens in business that's unexpected, like, oh, like a reschedule or I don't know, I forgot to send an email or something, then I'm like devastated again. Like I'm really trying to learn how to be like balanced in that. Yes. And, ultimately, your worth comes from, being a child of God, like I said before,
Yes. Yeah. And then it's knowing, I guess it's being really clear on what you're being called to do, because then if you're clear on your calling, then you can sustain all the ups and downs that will, inevitably come because they do. And there's a lot more downs than ups in business. Yes. And so I think when you're really clear, and I think that's really important, is just for people to get clear on firstly what their gifts are and their genius zone is, and then where they're being called to serve and where they're being called to give that. And then if it is in business or if it is in a creative project, it's about, okay, what story am I being called to tell here? Like what is it that God wants me to say? And I think always coming back to prayer as the starting point is really important. Mm-hmm. And then, speaking to other people and getting a big whiteboard out and mapping it all out and seeing what the common themes are. I think that's really important is knowing, honing it in on what it is you're trying to say. What is your story that you're trying to communicate?
Working backwards towards your goal is important too. And allowing yourself to dream. Like, I know that sounds strange, right? Like sometimes, like the other day I was brainstorming and, we're a small team. It's only 3 of us right now. And I just was trying to brainstorm for Storia. And I was like, I really wish we had XYZ. And then instead of being like, well, we can't because we don't have this piece of gear or we can't do this. I'm like, well, what if we had that? What is it going to take to get there? Even with building a brand, I think you have to do that. Like, what is, like, dare to dream and let yourself imagine. Now, you can't just daydream all day long without doing the work, of course, but like visioning for your business
absolutely
is just as important. So if you have a business partner or a coach or something, like big picture vision is actually really important, because if you, like you said, like if you don't have vision, it's just confusion and then you're just doing a bunch of stuff without like a direction. In the beginning, I mean, even in our business, we first were doing photo and video only, and now we've added a service of like, social media coaching. Yeah. And so that's part of the creative process too, is like allowing yourself to, like, as you try new things, maybe you realize, oh, actually I want to turn this way and turn this corner. Oh, actually, like the brand evolves as well.
There was a really beautiful Instagram post which you posted a while back, and you were talking about the middle of the story, that space between where you have this grand idea and then the end point. And that middle area is a big chunk of it, like in a book. And you quoted Brene Brown and you said the middle is messy, but that's where the magic happens. Yeah. And just as we're coming towards the end of our time together, I wanted to speak into that season of the middle of the story. So whether that's the middle of building a business or whether that's the middle of your story in parenting or wherever it is, because no one really likes to talk about the middle. We often talk about what was your falling in love story or your engagement story or the end of somebody's life. We talk about, the story of their life. But what happens when we're in the middle of that?
Yes.
It's a time where there's, I think, a lot of second guessing. There can be a lot of doubts. So I'm just wondering if you can speak into what made you post that and just your insights into the middle of our story.
Yeah. I mean, oh man, I resonate with that quote so much, because I think even when we look to literature and movies and other forms of art, I think we're drawn to, like, Joseph Campbell talks about, like, the hero's journey, right? Like, where our character, like, has a calling and then goes through a series of events of, like, refusal of the call and has a mentor, into the darkness, and then transformation and all those things. But, like, the best part of any story in literature, or even, I mean, we see it in scripture to all the things is the mess, because it's relatable. We root for the character. We care about them. You know, like who wants to like even The Wizard of Oz is my favorite movie. And it's my favorite movie, but like the best part of the movie to me is not when like Dorothy goes home. It's the journey, right? And that's, I'm so dramatic. I think it's just because I'm, the visual artist in me, I'm very dramatic, but really though, like we're drawn to those stories in maybe our daily life. And so I don't understand why sometimes we don't embrace it in our like actual lives, And so I don't know, like I've actually, my mom and I have talked about it. Like when we're going through hard times, we've said to each other, we're in the middle. Like this is just the middle of the story. Like this isn't the full story. And it doesn't mean like you come to some resolution and you're like, well, great, but it's just kind of that moment of like, this isn't going to be forever. And, maybe this will like empower someone someday. So I think the more we can embrace the mess, like the better,
Yes. And it's that vulnerability, isn't it? Like I know there's a Brene Brown quote that I love. It says, vulnerability is the last thing that I want you to see in me, but it's actually the first thing I look for in you. And I think when we see other people who are vulnerable, who are, not letting all their dirty laundry hang out, because that's not good either. But when we are honest, and we're honest about the struggle of life, I think what it does is it gives other people permission to show their true selves as well. When we get real about the mess in our own lives, and obviously sharing that with the right people in the right context who we trust, then I think that's really, really important, and it's a very valuable lesson. I remember when we were first married, like our first couple of months, Jonathan and I are quite strong people, so we hit heads a little bit in the first couple of months. And I remember being at a New Year's Eve party, and there was a couple there, and they were just sharing about a fight they'd had. And I was really stunned, because they just seemed like the most perfect couple. And she's like, are you kidding? I spent the whole first 6 months of my marriage crying in the bathtub, wondering if I made a mistake. And I was like, wow, like, so much of the time, and I think this is so true in marriage, sometimes business, but in the faith journey, sometimes we put up this facade that we have it all together. But like that example of that woman sharing about crying in the bath, like what she did was disarmed everybody else to realize, actually having an argument or, settling into marriage is not a sign that there's something wrong. It's just real. It's part of the journey. And so, I think that vulnerability in the middle of the story is very powerful.
Yeah, like let the guard come down, and it's a gift, and it's beautiful. Like nobody, you're quoting Brene Brown. I love Brene Brown. I love all her books. Oh my gosh, that could be another podcast. Like,
true.
But she talks about like after someone shares vulnerably, we don't think, oh my gosh, like who does that person think they are? Like usually we think that person is really brave. And so if we could just apply that to ourselves, how we would view a friend doing that, we just got to give ourselves a little more compassion as well.
Yeah, true. Very true. And I think, applying that to, I guess, business creative space as well, like stepping out and being vulnerable. And we've just done a podcast last week on the link between vulnerability and creativity. Like it takes enormous courage to put yourself out there and to tell your story, whether it's in business or privately.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Well, Frankie, look, we're coming to the end of our time together, but I wanted to throw out to you a couple of scenarios, and I just want you to give me whatever jumps into your head first. They're different scenarios for different women that I've come across over the years, and I'm really interested in your insight. So the first one is, say a woman dreams of starting something, whether it's a blog or a business, but she doesn't think she has anything to offer. What would you say to her?
First of all, I mean, I relate to this woman.
Yes.
The insecurity of feeling like you don't have anything to offer. And what I would say is, this is something my mom has taught me, but your brain doesn't know the difference between what is really happening and like what you're telling it. So if you say like, oh, I have nothing to offer, and oh, I stink at XYZ over and over to yourself, after a while, like you do start to believe it, I believe. And so I would say, get practical. Like if you want to start a blog or a business, like put yourself on a deadline. Like and break it down. Like, what are the steps that you have to take to get there? You know what I mean? Like figuring out a website, finding a lawyer, what kind of content are you going to make, all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But then, and really just like feel the resistance and do it anyways, you know?
Yeah. Okay, awesome. Second scenario. A beautiful woman has just started an Etsy store. She loves to create, but she can't get any sales. What could she do?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I love following creatives who sell like actual like products, you know,
Yeah.
and especially on Etsy, I'm all about that life. So I would say on social media, you can't just like only sell, right? I don't think selling is bad. So just kind of balance it out with value. So when I say value, I mean like tutorials, inspiration, even behind the scenes of like why you do what you do, right? And then when you pair value with sale, your audience like won't feel so like jarred like when you go to like make an ask. And so what I mean, I used to do this myself, and this is we've shifted to the more storytelling style of marketing, right? The more you tell your story, the more, you know, people relate to that. And so I would want to know for this person and their Etsy store, like what inspired them to start their business? What was it like when they sold their first product? Like, because when I buy a product, like I love, especially from a local maker, like I love to like know the story behind it. Absolutely. As opposed to like, oh, I could get that online at like Amazon or something. Yes. You know what I mean? So
that's a good answer. All right. Third one. Someone's been at the business of business for a couple of years and they're feeling really stale. What advice would you give them?
I would say, and I speak from a place of, you know, this is something my mom and I did this year, is we invested back in our business. So we're feeling like we know we're on to something, but we need to figure some things out. So we invested in a coach. That was just such a great experience because, you know, someone else was able to like speak in to our business who was in the industry. So like, don't be afraid to invest back in your business. And I would also say, you know, through coaching, we learned the importance of delegating out. So if you're feeling stale, is it you're feeling stale because you're overwhelmed by like, you're wearing so many hats? Is there a hat you could like delegate to somebody else? Even if it's a virtual assistant, like it doesn't have to be this huge thing either. Figure out what you're really good at and give the other thing, even if it's just one, to someone else. But you have to coach them on how to do that, you know?
All right. And the last one is a mum has had a passion project for years. It's been a little bit of fun, a creative outlet, but now she's wanting to take it to the next level. And the dream of taking it to the next level totally freaks her out and she doesn't know where to start.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I feel like my gut reaction is saying, are you afraid of succeeding? Like, are you afraid of failing? But sometimes we can be afraid of, what if I actually like do this and it is actually good, right? Because everything changes, you know? And so don't be afraid of that. Like I said, you know, feel the resistance, do it anyways. Like, I mean, I'm speaking all these people, I know I'm not a mom or I'm not like in these categories, but I like feel like I'm a woman in each of these scenarios. And I'm like, I got to get out of my own way. You know what I mean? And again, you might be robbing someone of your gift if you don't, because the thing you have to offer can serve someone. And really believe that you have to believe in what you're selling. Like I think there was a time when it came to like client meetings and just like the sales side of business in general that I was really bad at. And I think it was because my attitude was like, they're probably not going to like this. And I'm like going into a meeting being like, they're probably going to say no. Right. And who wants to like invest in someone that doesn't believe in their product? And now I don't mean just be like, well, I'm the best and like pump yourself up, but really think about like what the thing that you do like does and how it serves people. And the more that you can own that, like we've been talking about owning our stories, the easier it'll be. So you got to believe in what you're offering. It's kind of like that quote, like speak up even if your voice shakes. Like, because even the thing you might be offering, maybe it's like you want to do more public speaking or other things like that. Like you have to do it even when you're scared. And after a while, it gets easier and easier. Yeah,
absolutely. You know, there was one thing I said I would never do with my life. I would never do public speaking. And so it's actually like I speak quite a bit, but it's the irony of it. I mean, I was the kid at school who I would be terrified if any teacher would get me to put my hand up or read out loud or, you know, I hated drama, all of those things. And I just found the irony of how God called me into speaking and to working with teenagers, because that's another thing I said I'd never do.
Amazing.
But I think he does. I read this quote during a season where I felt the Lord was really pushing me into and asking me to speak more, but I was really nervous and I didn't think I was very good. And there was a quote from Abraham Lincoln, and it said, "I will study and prepare myself, and perhaps my time will come." And I think it's really about using each season wisely, like using each season wisely and leaning into the season and learning all that you can in that season.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Amen. That's it. And I love that idea of season, because even in my own story, like maybe God calls you to something for a season, and changing doesn't mean that something's bad or wrong. It's just like a pivot, and, there's big picture discernment, and then there's like the micro little discernments that we have to make too. So yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh my gosh. That's a good word.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Frankie. I just love her energy and her passion, and she makes me want to go out and do more. If you'd like to check out her Insta page, you can find her on storia.studio, STORIA.studio. She's got some great posts and advice on social media if you're interested. If you like what you've heard on the podcast, please share the link with your friends and leave a review on the podcast platform. This helps to get the word out there. Next week, we will be joined by one of my favorite human beings, Trish Mccarthy. So until then, have a beautiful week and God bless you.